Hello, everybody. We had a few challenges with our live webinar, and so I wanted to post a summary video so that all of you could get the key points despite our demo God issues. So we went over, for the most part, that I really wanted you to understand is the journey that we have taken with adaptive cards, moving from display only to the upcoming experimental embedded designer. So all of this added value is with the goal of enabling situations with adaptive cards inside Power Automate that would enable you to display and collect information in the context of your business processes. So one of the things I wanted to start with is with the journey. So early 2019, we released adaptive cards that were display only. And I'm actually going to spend time in this video kind of showing you a display only card. Then in the second period around Ignite, we finished some work in order to give you continuation, because many people were saying, hey, I like that I can post an adaptive card. Hundreds of people were getting savvy at making adaptive cards, in the sense that we were getting emails saying, hey, I made a form in adaptive cards, but I'm not able to get the response back in Flow. And so being that we heard that so often, we went ahead and we did the work in order to give you a wait for response action, which I will show you. And that will actually enable you to post a card that has input fields and get back a response. And then finally, as we move forward into end of January, beginning of February, you will see the new experimental feature. And this feature targets people who are less likely to want to manipulate JSON, because in both of the two earlier scenarios, people had to edit the JSON after they created the card in adaptive cards. In this new scenario, they will be able to create the card directly in Microsoft in Power Automate, so that they won't have to manipulate, punctuation and stuff, which in the past could break the card for new users and or people who are uncomfortable using JSON. And I have to say, even personally, it is a challenge sometimes as a citizen developer to manipulate JSON. So having the designer embedded in Flow enables me to format my cards just like I do in adaptive cards, but also combine that with the ability to bind data. So let's look at these three in action. Okay, so starting with display. This is one of the things that I've been talking about at the Airlift, at Ignite, everywhere, is that you can insert these adaptive cards in the context of a team, which is awesome because teams are usually focused on some particular business initiative or a business project or a business service. And so by being able to insert the data in the context of the people doing the service is phenomenal. Then you get to the second point of, how about frontline workers who need contextual information in relation to that team they may be part of, but they might not have access to all of your cloud subscriptions. And maybe we don't even want them to have access because it would take so much effort to train them on dynamic sales or to train them on SharePoint, when in fact they just need very small subsets of information that we can automate to go to a Teams instance where they've been invited and they can see that. So at Ignite, this particular thing was highlighted in my presentations, and in my 23rd day of the 25 days of flows, I did a video showing where a frontline worker could come to a site where they've been invited and type a telephone number. So the telephone number of their customer. So maybe it's a third-party vendor who has to bring information to customers, and they need to contact them sometimes by phone, but the phone number in this case is like that unique identifier to get to the right contact. Now, dynamic sales has all the information about that customer, their name, their location. And what we're doing here is we're triggering a flow with the phone number, and then flow is going using the credentials of the flow maker, not of the person using this feature, is using those credentials to go into Dynamics and get that information and then post it here so that anyone can use it. And so you get this idea of a map over here on the right with the location, but also some dynamic fields that came in from the database as well, such as will they allow email, will they allow calls, things like that that can help that person on the ground achieve their business goal. And so it's like a point in time, but this is not a live connection to any data source, so we don't have to give them any extra credentials or any extra training. So really nice. And so this is an example. You can see full details on how to make that flow here, but I do want to show you at least one data only adaptive card live. I want to build that with you. So we're going to go to adaptivecards.io. and we're going to open their designer, and the link to this will be in the description. Now we can open up a sample here and just pull down anything and then edit it, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a card where someone can post information from SharePoint directly into Teams. And so I'm going to edit this slightly. So this is a container, this is another container, it's a field, and then there's a column. And so you can see all the structure here, card to column set, to column, to column, to text block, to fact set, and then these buttons, okay? So I'm gonna revise these live on the screen using my element properties here on the right. I'm gonna change adaptive card is update from SharePoint. Of course, I can make this anything I want. I don't need this section with, so I can just highlight it and press delete. In this section, I want the details of the description of the SharePoint item. And then I'm going to make a little fact set here. So I'm going to make this title. I'm going to make this details. Well, no, we have details up above. So let's do title and then impact, and then cost estimate. So I happen to know there's some cost estimates in this particular data. All right, so then we're gonna close that, and now we have 3. Notice I could delete a fact that I didn't want, or I can add a new one if I wanna do that. And then I'm going to copy this information over here just to give myself placeholders that I can remember. And so anything without a colon is gonna be replaced with a dynamic value in Flow. Now, I don't need these 2. Notice I can hide this because I don't need it anymore. I don't need these 2 buttons because they request data. And we're talking about display only right now. So I'm going to remove these 2 buttons and add back an open URL button. And this open URL button will enable me to go to a link. Okay, so let's click on this and let's change this to open SharePoint item, right? Because that's our text. Now I have 2 URLs. The one on the bottom is going to be the link to the actual SharePoint item, but I'm going to put a placeholder there because Adaptive Cards doesn't know anything about my SharePoint sites. So I'm just going to put a placeholder there. I'm also going to add a URL for the icon. So if I go to bing.com and just do a search for open file icon, I can probably get one from images, and I'm not suggesting you do this. It's just an easy way for me to get a URL to an icon. And I'm going to put that in there. And you'll notice if you watch the button that will add an icon. So whenever you're using images in Adaptive Cards, you want to use a URL to make that very easy. Because it does not accept actual photo content. So, you know, like if you had a button and you had someone take a photo, you can't take that photo content and put it into the card. You'd need to have a URL to that photo first. All right. So now this looks pretty good. I'm just going to go ahead and do copy card JSON. And now let's go to Flow. So I'm going to go back into here. Now I have a few lists that could be used here. I'm going to use let's do purchase potential change orders. And so in my flow, I'm going to create a new flow, and I'm going to create one that can be dynamically from a selected item. So I'm going to do automated, and I'm going to do for selected item. And then I'm going to go ahead and create it. So I'm just going to choose this because sometimes that list gets long for me. So I'm going to do for selected item, and I'm going to choose that as my trigger. Okay, let me click on SharePoint. It'll help me find it faster. There we go. All right, and now we're going to pick our site, which is CM Portal. And then we're going to pick our list, which is PCO. This could be any list. Now, one thing that's important is you need to be in your default environment in order for selected item to work. And so I'm just going to name this for selected post details to teams. Okay, it might be a little long, but that's what this is going to do. They're going to be able to pick a selected item on SharePoint and then post it to Teams. All right, so now I'm going to also get the item because I need the details of the item more than what I get back with the trigger. So I'm going to go back into SharePoint and look for get item. And then from there, I'm going to go to SharePoint, CM Portal, same exact list. And I'm going to pass the ID or the ID number from our trigger. Okay, so now we are set up for our adaptive card. I'm just going to make sure I didn't, so you want to make sure that you don't delete your clipboard while you're doing this because we copied from a designer, remember? And I'm going to post this as a flow bot to the channel. I'm going to put this in my Power Platform demos maybe, and I'll put it in the general channel, and I will just paste that JSON that I got from my adaptive card. And now I'm going to just replace the key things on here. So as for the description, I'm going to just remove that and go down to my dynamic content and pick description from SharePoint. And then for the title, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing. Scroll down and choose title for SharePoint. And then I'm going to go down to impact. And this is whether it's schedule or cost. And for the most part, probably in real life, I would set this to OData filter for cost. And then I'm going to get my cost estimate from the cost estimate column. Now, I want to share a new function that we have for this too. I'm just going to click after this and go into expressions. If you do format number, you won't see this pop up. But you can use format number today to take a number like cost estimate and then use hash formatting to format it as currency if you want to. So dollar, something similar to what you guys always do in Excel. Just remember that you are surrounding this with single quotes rather than double quotes as you would in Excel. Okay, and then we're going to click OK. So now I'm going to use that formatted number instead because it's going to look like currency. And then finally down here, I didn't want to replace my icon URL, but I do want to replace my URL with the link to the item. And there we go. Now we have our card finished. We're going to save it. It's going to save beautifully. And then we're going to go to our PCO. Now I'm just going to check and make sure I don't have others. Okay, I don't. So now we name this for selected post details to teams. So this means that if I select something here and then grab my flow menu, because we did for selected item, that will automatically pop up at the top of our flow drop down. And we can pick that, and it will immediately, in context with SharePoint, run right there with SharePoint. So I'm just going to do continue, and I'm going to run flow. And now if we go back to our Teams, right? So we're going to go here and we're just going to go to Teams. And you can see that in my Power Platform demo under General, it just popped up. And there you can see there on the bottom, update from SharePoint. And this is the one we picked, and it plugged in everything for us. If we click the button, it will open the item on SharePoint. And so that was really easy to do. You'll notice up above, I also have some display with the weather. So you can decide to post the weather daily to your team, weekly, monthly, whenever weather really matters to what you do for a living. One thing that I want to show you is that we have documented all of this under a new category called How to, and then use adaptive cards to model flows. And what we've done is we've not only done an introduction to this to give you some of the things that I'm saying here, but we've also given you some sample JSON code blocks that you can use to build these different display forms. We will also be adding samples that do the next section of our deck, which I'm getting to next, which is forms. So watch this section because it will grow over the next 4 weeks to include everything as they roll out. Okay, so going back to our presentation a minute, let's talk about the second level. And this is what we worked on around Ignite, where we started to talk about input forms and data collection. Okay, so in this case, we've got a brand new business forms option with fringe benefits. In other words, you already had the ability to insert an adaptive card into your business process, but you couldn't collect data from it. Now you will be able to. This is actually what we got done for Ignite. And many of you saw my demos there at Ignite. So now you'll get to be able to try this on your own. Late January, early February, you should all be seeing this light up into your actions on Teams. You'll actually see 4 actions now. 2 with the wait for a response. And so these are continuation, which enables you to wait for a response. So you can collect data from frontline workers here. So let's imagine that we want to collect leads for Dynamics 365 for sales. And we've got a lot of marketing people, or maybe we have some vendors that marketing hired in order to pass out information. But we said to those vendors, hey, vendors, if you catch someone really interested, we'd like you to submit that as a lead. Now, they're very short term. They're just for the different conferences. So we don't really need to give them access to Dynamics for Sales. But we can definitely give them a button that works within the context of their mobile apps on Teams so that they can pop up a form when they need it and then fill it out. And what's wonderful about this is when they fill it out, they don't need to have access to anything that we consider cloud services, which means we don't have to train them on how to create a lead in Dynamics. We just have to train them how to press a button on their phone, get this form, and fill it out. Because the form, once it's filled out and submit, will run under the credentials of the Flow Maker. And this also enables you to have branching scenarios in Flow. So in this particular lead collection form, you see that they can indicate what services they're interested in. So now, like when you think of an adaptive card by itself, it displays or collects information. But within the context of a flow, what happens now is I can assign different account managers to this lead based on what selection they made on the form. Or I can just send this to one account manager, create the lead in Dynamics for Sales, and give it the appropriate relationships for these other services. So I have the ability to use this data and branch that information in different data sources to different people based on what the form input has in it, right? And then it's my job to figure out what my forms need to be asking for. Okay, in this case, we're asking for a lead. So this, I'd like to give you a little peek at how this works. So I'm going to take you back to Flow, and I'm going to take you into a brand new screen. So if you just give me 1 minute. Okay, so I'm going to take you into this brand new screen, and I'm going to walk you through that process. Just give this a minute to refresh. All right, so now I have this flow set up already, and basically this is going to be a template that you'll be able to use in Flow. All right, so you don't have to memorize these steps because I've already distributed a template for this. I'm going to edit this so you can see what it does. Basically, it has a trigger at the top, and then it has a post and wait for response. And I just want to show you that what's going to happen is you're going to have 4 actions. Post and wait for a response, post, and let me just show you that list. So we're going to go to the documentation, and I'll just show you that list there because it's a little bit easier for you to remember these different choices. We're going to go into our documentation, and we're going to look at the adaptive cards section. And we're going to click on Overview Adaptive Cards, where I also give a demo. But if you look down here, you have 2 options for posting to Teams channel, just posting the card to a channel. But then you have also for channel and wait for a response. Okay, and then you also have the same options for users. So you have post as an adaptive card to a user, or post and wait for a response. What's important is here, if you want data back from the card, then you must choose an action that says wait for a response. And if you don't see that yet, you'll be seeing it shortly. It's on a train, it's on its way to you. All right, but you will not be able to collect the data back from the card until you see the wait for a response. Okay, and that's the action I've used, even though I've renamed it just to make it clear that I'm doing lead collection here. I just did a rename over here. All right, so now same thing as I did before. I can go make this card in adaptive cards and then just paste the data here. Now, by the way, even if you use our samples, you can still go back and forth. Like, you can insert our samples into the adaptive cards interface just by replacing what's in the card payload editor, and that will enable you to see it up there, right? So let's go back to my flow and take this, which is the sample for lead collection, which is in the documentation. If I paste that in here, now I can see this in the designer of adaptive cards, and if I want to make tweaks to it right here, I can. Like, maybe I don't want it to be like that, I can do this, or I don't want capitals for last name, and I can do that. And so I can tweak any of these by pasting them into the card payload editor. And you can also change the choices. So if I wanted to do that, that would be over here in the elements. I could add new choices, replace these. I could even add another thing on this card, and make it exactly what I want. All right. But then after I get through making it beautiful the way I want, then I actually do want to copy the payload. And you can do that by doing copy card JSON up here, and then bring it back and make sure you end up with that revised version in your flow. But we give you some samples that you can start with just to get you rolling. All right. So now, since this is a form, I don't need to put any dynamic content into this. But what I will point out that we have here is an update message area. And the update message area makes sure that this flow will actually replace the card with a update message. And this is so people don't see that card still sitting there looking beautiful and think they can submit it again, because it can only be submit once. Okay, now you only get 1 line for your replacement card. So I added an action below this that actually takes that information, and I need to put it in the same site here. Just the big thing that I forget to do is you just put it in the same site. That way, after this card is submit, even though I only have one message line here, I still get whatever I put in my follow-up message. And so I am posting this message after this is submit, because the flow will stop as soon as this is posted and wait for someone to respond. And only one person can respond. Okay? Now, once they respond though, then the flow continues and we get quite a bit of additional data. And so what you'll notice in the outputs is that they are named after the IDs that we put in here. So in the area where the phone number is and the email address is, you can see that we have an ID field here. This ID field exists, this ID property, exists on every input field. And what you give it as a name is what will show up in the dynamic content after that answer is given. And so in our samples, you'll notice we prefix them all with AC for adaptive card, but you can name them whatever you like. And that means that after this is finished, and I'll just add a compose so you can see this. After this is finished, then you'll be able to click in here and show off all the fields that came from there. So, and they're named exactly what's after that ID. And so now you can use them in the rest of your flow for conditions and so on. In my case, I just use them to post a message saying everything that basically happened on that form. And I do recommend doing that versus leaving this at the default of no. Because if you say no here, that means the card will not change. It will continue to look like a form, which can confuse people because they might try to figure it out, fill it out. And if they fill it out, it's really funny. It won't even give them an error, but Flow only pays attention to the first submission. Doesn't pay attention to any others. All right, so we'll just run this flow. This is in my Teams, and you'll see that here's the form, right? So we got the form, and then if we want to fill this form out, we can do that here. Okay, and then notice what happens when I submit. And this is because I said yes in the property of message, right? And so if I didn't say yes in the property of message, pressing submit would still send the data to Power Automate, but it would leave this form looking ready to take another lead, which it is not going to do, right? So best practice, always add a message. And then when you press submit, now it will collapse itself and put whatever you put in that message area, right? Again, since it's only one line, then I actually add a flow action underneath it that says, okay, this is the person that submit that form, right? This is the lead that they entered, and here are the services they picked. Now, this is totally up to the business. You might want to leave these submissions anonymous or hidden. So then in that case, you would just close the card, right? You wouldn't add this. But I find it helpful to let people know what happened, okay? Again, helpful, not required. So just to show you the difference, if I say no, which is the default, all right? So I'm going to say no here. I'm also going to remove all of this, so there's no update message, and this is the default. I'm also going to stop this from running, so I'm going to do a configure run after, and only run after if the previous one has been skipped, right? So that's my cheat to kind of silence that last action. And now I'm going to test this again, and we're going to watch this hit that location. Now notice again, it's going to stop. Well, I'm sorry, it's not going to stop. It's going to wait, and that's that orange icon. It's not going to go any further. Even if there were other actions that weren't configured right after, it will not continue until somebody responds to that. So we're going to go back and respond to the second one. All right. So we're going to do Jane Smith, and we're going to do jsmith@email.com. And then we're going to do the fake phone number. And she's going to be interested in that. Now, when I click submit, though, watch the difference. Submit. It reset. That's all it did. It reset. So it's very important that you try to use the message line, because otherwise someone else in this team might assume they can fill this out again, right? And here's the thing, at this time, again, this is a preview feature. We're going to try and improve it. But at this time, when they fill this out the second time, Flow is not paying attention, because guess what? The Flow run is done. It's done. Flow's done. No more running, right? It's finished. If I submit this again, like maybe I'm another person in that team and I think that I should fill out this form, I'm going to press submit, and it's not going to give me an error. And I could make the assumption that I've submit something, and I have not. Because the process is use the button to get the form, fill out the form, submit it. But then that button was just for the person who asked for it. Anybody else who sees that form will not benefit from using it. So just remember, the best practice is to change no to yes and put something in your update message. It might even be as simple as lead submit from conference, right? And this is the Flow maker who makes this decision, okay? Not the person submitting the form, right? What does it say? And then make sure, if you want to give them more details after that, just post a follow-up message in Teams that gives them all those details, because they will all be available in dynamic content. Okay, so this is the one that has been asked for and begged for. So many people have emailed us and said, I just want to be able to get content back from my Flow. And this does that for you. It gives you dynamic content for any input field they filled out. Okay, and so you can use that as conditions in your Flow. Submitting to sales, submitting to SharePoint, submitting to whatever data sources you might have based on how they answered the questions here. All right, so really cool feature. So let's go to the last one, which I totally love. It's called the Embedded Adaptive Card Designer. Why embedded? Well, we're actually going to put the adaptive card editor directly in your Flow action, so that you'll be able to build a card from Power Automate with no dependencies on knowing how to manipulate JSON, which is one thing that some of our newer users have difficulty with, and some of our citizen developers too, who don't necessarily want to learn code. So what this will do is it will enable any type of any individual who wants to post a card to build one with the beauty of the adaptive card editor in a simplified method, so that they can do it faster and easier. So let me just show you what this would feel like, because I don't have an actual demo for you. We will come back and do that again soon. But I'm going to go to adaptive cards here, and I'm going to show you that we have simplified this. So if you look at the previous screen I showed you, this is simplified so that it really focuses on a Flow user. You still have all of your containers. I think the only one we may have hidden is media, because you can't insert videos in this version. Teams is supporting 1.2. And so everything that's supported under Adaptive Cards 1.2 will be supported in Teams. except the media, which is not going to be supported immediately. We're going to be continuously updating this and making it work better, but I wanted you to know that's coming, okay? In the meantime, it's not available today, adding like videos on your cards. All right, now, one thing I do want to show you is that in the actual designer, you have a lot of host options as well. But since in Flow, you will primarily start with using this in Teams, other things will come later, you will only have the choice of the Teams hosts so that you can see what they would look like in a dark version of Teams versus what it would look like in a light version. But this is the beauty of adaptive cards. This is not something you have to think about, because the adaptive card service is managing what the host needs to make your card look great. All right. But here's the thing that you're going to have in Flow that you don't have here. Right now, when you build your adaptive cards from adaptivecards.io, you have to add placeholders for everything. So you have to put a little placeholder text over here. And then if you want to put dynamic content in there, you've got to bring this JSON, copy JSON, and bring it into Flow, right? Which means that from the Flow, you will actually insert those dynamic contents. And what happens with many users is that they accidentally delete something that breaks their JSON. And so imagine if you didn't need to do copy card JSON, you could simply select something, get a drop down, and pick a dynamic content token directly from this designer. Wouldn't that be awesome? Well, that's what you're going to get with our experimental feature that you will get probably early February. You will be able, as long as you turn on experimental features. And so I just want to show you where this is. In the cog, you want to choose all Power Automate settings, and you want to turn experimental features on. You don't have to do this right now, but if you want to try any of our experimental features, for example, you might have noticed that I had a special designer going on in my last demo, and that's because I'm working in a test environment that has experimental features turned on. So if you turn those on, you will see the ability that I'm talking about here, where adaptive cards will be embedded in Power Automate. You'll use the same exact actions, only you'll have some mapping capability. So many of you have probably used Flow before, and you've used either create CSV action, create HTML action, or select. There's quite a few that have what's called map, right? And this mapping section allows you to map data to this card. So I can type city, because that's what I want to call it, but then I can put a dynamic value over here. Or I can type zip code here and put the dynamic value of postal code here. So these are all dynamic content coming from up above, right? Just so happens that the button gives me a whole bunch of information about the person that presses the button. So this mapping will be included with the action here, so that the first thing that you do, instead of pasting in JSON, is mapping what content do you want to see in your card. And you can only map, of course, what is coming from the previous steps. Now, once you map that data, then it'll be available right here. And so you can click on anything in your card design, and there'll be a drop down that will let you pick the dynamic token that you want to associate with that control. This is off the hook, especially for people who are brand new to working with JSON. It removes that dependency completely and enables you to just focus on your data, which is what most of us do best. It's great news. I'm looking so forward to it. All right. This is going to change the story, right? And remember that, once we start doing this, it's going out as experimental because it does have layers of things to think about. And so we want to see how this works with newer users, but we also want to see you give us feedback. So go out to the forums, give it a tag of hashtag adaptive cards, and we are watching that tag to get your feedback. If you indicate that you're testing the experimental feature, that will help. But based on your feedback, this may evolve and get even better. So we're doing our best to, as we've always said, to bring this value to you wherever you are, whoever you are, because we want to close the seam between the value that the citizen and professional developers can add through the Power Platform. So don't worry. As this stuff starts rolling out, you will see it in your tenant. If you do not see it today, it's just because it's still rolling out. You'll have full documentation. So adaptivecards.io has an amazing schema documentation to help you explain and understand every single control that you can use. And then we have the Power Automate documentation will focus on our actions, giving you best practices, samples, as well as templates. So you'll get both templates in the template gallery, just search for adaptive cards, and sample code blocks that'll be available in our documentation so that you can hit the ground running. Okay, one thing I do want to point out to you, let's see if I can make this, if I can go to the Explorer real quick. I'm going to take you to the Schema Explorer. And I just want to point out that this is wonderful documentation that Adaptive Cards has done, but you do need to pay attention to the version, right? Teams has been set up to accept anything 1.0, 1.1, or 1.2. So they are now connected to 1.2. So if you find that there's something that you can't do because it's a version other than 1.2, please post that in the ideas forum. Let us know that you want to do something that's not available yet. And then we'll work with our partners in Teams and in Adaptive Cards to make sure the experience is improved over time. Thank you so much for everything. I'm going to give you a AKA that'll be under this description of the page where we're going to have all of the documentation. I think these links have been updated by our technical leads. I want to give a kudos at the end of this video to our development team, especially Courtney and Arnav, who worked hard to make sure this was a great experience for you. And I'd also like to give kudos to our technical writer, Dion, who spent so much time just trying to organize it in a way that you could assimilate easily over time. So big kudos to the entire team for making these kind of features possible. And I can't wait to see what you're going to do with these features. I hope you'll enjoy the journey and that I'll hear from you soon about your wins and/or your feedback. Have a great day and enjoy the experience.